She walked down the narrow street with her old bag slung over her shoulder. The cold wind brushed against her cheeks, but she didn't mind it. What bothered her more was the little folded note in her hand. It had the name of a cafe written on it and the time for her blind date. She looked at it for the 10th time that afternoon, unsure if she should even go. Inside her wallet, there was only $5 left. She had counted it that morning before leaving her tiny rented room. $5, that was all she had for the rest of the week. Enough for one small coffee, maybe a sandwich if she was careful. She tried to laugh at it, but it only made her chest feel tight. The cafe was a small place at the corner of the street. It wasn't fancy, but it looked warm from the outside. The windows glowed with a soft yellow light, and the smell of baked bread floated through the air. She took a deep breath and walked in, trying not to let her nerves show. There were people talking, some typing on laptops, others reading books. The sound of soft music played in the background. She looked around, unsure of where to sit. The waiter smiled and pointed to a small table near the window. She thanked him quietly and sat down. She ordered a single cup of coffee. Nothing else. It cost $4.20. That left her with only 80 cents in her pocket. She tried not to think about it. She stirred the coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl around. Her fingers tapped on the table, nervous and restless. Her friend had set up this blind date, insisting it would be good for her. "You've been alone too long," her friend had said over the phone. "He's a good man. Give it a try." She had agreed because she didn't want to seem ungrateful, but deep down she wasn't sure if love was something meant for her anymore. Not when she could barely afford to live day to day. At another table nearby, a man sat with a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He was well dressed but not flashy. He seemed calm, focused on helping the child cut her sandwich. The girl giggled as she talked about something that made no sense to anyone but her father. He smiled warmly, listening to every word. The girl noticed the young woman sitting alone and whispered something to her father. He turned his head slightly, following his daughter's gaze. His eyes rested on the woman for a brief moment. She didn't see him looking, but something about her quiet, nervous manner caught his attention. There was a kind of sadness in the way she held her cup, as if it carried all the weight of her world. He didn't mean to stare, but sometimes people reminded him of his own past. He had known what it was like to struggle, to sit alone in a cafe pretending everything was fine. Now, years later, he owned a successful business, but he hadn't forgotten where he came from. The woman checked her phone again. Her date was already 15 minutes late. She tried to smile at the waiter when he came by to refill her water, pretending she wasn't bothered. But deep down, a voice whispered, "Maybe he's not coming." Outside, the wind grew stronger, blowing leaves against the window. She wrapped her thin scarf tighter around her neck. Maybe she should leave. Maybe this was a bad idea. But just as she was about to stand up, the door opened. A man walked in, scanning the cafe with quick eyes. He looked around, checked his phone, and then spotted her. She gave a small smile and waved slightly. He walked over and sat down. "Hey," he said casually, without much warmth. "You're the one I'm supposed to meet, right?" "Yes," she said softly. "Thanks for coming." He ordered a drink without even asking if she wanted anything. She kept her smile, trying to make small talk, but he seemed distracted. He scrolled through his phone, replied to a message, and then looked around the cafe as if he wished he were somewhere else. "So," he said finally, looking at her, "what do you do?" She hesitated. "I used to work at a design shop, but it closed a few months ago. I'm looking for something new." He nodded slowly. "So, you're unemployed?" She felt a pinch of embarrassment, but nodded. "For now, yes," he gave a short laugh. "Tough times, huh? You'll figure it out." The way he said it wasn't kind. It felt like a polite way of saying you're not my type. She tried to keep the conversation going, asking about his work. He talked for a long time about how busy he was, how important his projects were, how everyone at his office depended on him. She listened, nodding, sipping her coffee quietly. She didn't say much. She didn't want to talk about her rent being late or how she skipped meals sometimes just to save a few dollars. Those weren't the kind of things people wanted to hear on a date. At the nearby table, the man with the little girl noticed her again. She looked small sitting there, smiling politely at a man who didn't even notice the effort she was putting into the conversation. The father didn't say anything, but he felt something tighten in his chest. His daughter whispered again, "Daddy, that lady looks sad." He smiled gently and said, "Maybe she's just having a hard day, sweetie." As time passed, the girl on the blind date began to feel smaller and smaller. Every word from the man across from her felt heavier, like tiny stones falling on her heart. He talked about expensive dinners, trips he wanted to take, and how he didn't like people who couldn't keep up. She laughed softly, pretending to find it funny, but inside she wanted to leave. Then, when the waiter came with the bill, the man reached into his jacket pocket and froze. He frowned and said, "Oh no, I think I left my wallet in the car." She blinked, unsure how to react. "Oh, okay. Can you cover this?" he asked casually, like it was no big deal. "I'll pay you back later." Her heart sank. She stared at the bill, $32. Her coffee was the cheapest thing on it. She couldn't tell him she only had 80 cents left. Her hands began to shake slightly as she searched through her bag, pretending to look for money. The man with the little girl had seen the whole thing. He noticed the look on her face, the panic she tried to hide. He stood up quietly and walked to the counter. When the waiter came back, the young woman tried to explain. "I'm so sorry, I don't—" But the waiter smiled kindly and said, "It's already taken care of, miss." She blinked in surprise. "What, by who?" He just nodded toward the back of the cafe. She turned around and saw the man with the little girl giving her a small, warm smile. His daughter waved happily. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come out. Her date stood up, muttering something about being late, and left quickly. She sat there for a few seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. She felt embarrassed, relieved, and grateful all at once. When she finally stood up to leave, she walked past the man and his daughter. She stopped for a second and said softly, "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." He smiled. "It's all right. Everyone needs a little help sometimes." His voice was calm, steady, kind, the kind of tone that felt rare these days. The little girl smiled up at her and said, "You looked sad. Daddy said kind people help other people." Her eyes watered slightly, but she forced a small smile. "Your dad is right. You're both very kind." Then she left the cafe quietly, walking back into the cold evening air. Outside, she looked up at the city lights. The day had not gone the way she hoped, but somehow she didn't feel as hopeless anymore. Someone had seen her when she felt invisible. Someone had shown kindness when she least expected it. She walked slowly down the street, her hands in her coat pockets, the memory of that little girl's smile warming her heart. Back inside the cafe, the man watched her go. His daughter looked up and said, "Daddy, will we see her again?" He smiled thoughtfully and said, "Maybe. The world has a funny way of bringing people back together." The little girl nodded, happily sipping her juice. The man turned his eyes back to the window, watching the young woman disappear into the crowd. He didn't know her name, but something about her lingered in his thoughts long after she was gone. And as the cafe lights dimmed and the city settled into night, both of them, two strangers whose worlds had briefly touched, carried with them a quiet hope. A small act of kindness had changed something. Not much, but enough to remind them both that sometimes even the smallest moments could mean everything. The next morning came with the sound of light rain tapping against the window of her small apartment. The city looked gray and tired, much like she felt inside. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying everything that happened at the cafe. The awkward date, the man leaving without paying, and that stranger who quietly covered her bill. She didn't even know his name. Yet his kindness had stuck with her like a small light that refused to go out. Every time she thought about it, she felt both grateful and embarrassed. She wanted to thank him properly, but she knew she would probably never see him again. The world was too big for that. She got up, washed her face, and made a cup of tea from the last bag she had. The cupboard was nearly empty now. Rent was due in a few days, and she had no idea how she would pay it. Still, she told herself not to give up. Maybe she'd find something, a part-time job, a chance, anything. She spent the morning walking through the neighborhood, asking at small shops if they needed help. Most shook their heads kindly. "Sorry, not right now," they said. She smiled politely each time, though her heart grew heavier with every rejection. By noon, the rain had stopped, but her shoes were soaked. She stopped at a park bench, sat down, and closed her eyes for a moment. Children were playing nearby, their laughter echoing through the air. She watched them and smiled faintly. For a second, the world didn't feel so heavy. Across town, the man from the cafe was sitting in his office, staring out at the skyline. His desk was neat, papers stacked in order, a sign of someone who liked control and balance. Yet his thoughts weren't on work. They kept drifting back, to that young woman at the cafe, the one who had looked so nervous yet carried herself with quiet dignity. He didn't know why she stayed in his mind. Maybe it was because of the way she tried to smile even when her date treated her poorly. Or maybe it was because he had once been there too, sitting in places pretending things were fine when life felt like it was falling apart. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant reminding him of a meeting in 20 minutes. He replied briefly, then looked over at the picture frame on his desk. It was of his daughter, her smile bright and full of life. She was the reason he worked, so hard, the reason he cared about keeping things stable. Life had been tough since his wife passed away years ago, but his little girl had kept him going. That night, he picked her up from school. As they walked home, she skipped beside him, talking about her day, her friends, and the art project she made in class. She was painting a picture of a nice lady at the cafe, she said proudly. He looked down at her, surprised. "You mean the lady from yesterday?" "Yes," the girl said, nodding eagerly. "She looked sad, but pretty. I made her smile in my picture." He smiled softly. "That's very kind of you." "Do you think we'll see her again?" the girl asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But sometimes people cross our paths for a reason. Maybe someday." The next few days passed quietly. The young woman kept looking for work, visiting one place after another. She tried a bookstore, a flower shop, even a small design studio downtown, but there were no openings. Each night she returned home tired, staring at her phone in silence. No calls, no new emails, no luck. On Friday afternoon, as she walked through the market, she saw a flyer taped to a lamppost. "Help wanted. Bookstore assistant needed. Part-time. Apply in person." She tore off the small slip with the address and smiled for the first time that week. The next morning, she dressed in her neatest clothes, a plain blouse and faded jeans, and headed to the bookstore. It was a cozy place filled with the scent of paper and coffee. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at her resume and asked a few questions. By the end of the short interview, the owner smiled. "You seem polite and dependable. Can you start Monday?" She almost cried from relief. "Yes, of course, thank you so much." When she stepped out of the store, the world seemed brighter. She walked down the street, the sun warming her face. Maybe things were finally turning around. Monday morning came, and she started her first day at the bookstore. She dusted shelves, helped customers, and learned how to use the register. She felt nervous at first, but the small space soon began to feel familiar. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by books, quiet stories stacked neatly in rows, waiting for someone to pick them up. Around noon, the door opened, and she heard a small voice call out, "Daddy, look, books about animals." She turned and froze for a second. It was the same man from the cafe and his daughter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled warmly, a look of surprise and recognition in his eyes. "You again," he said gently. "Looks like the world decided we should meet after all." She felt her face flush slightly. "I guess so," she said, smiling shyly. His daughter ran up to her and grinned. "Hi. Do you remember me?" "Of course I do," she said, crouching down to her level. "How could I forget the little artist from the cafe?" The girl giggled. "Daddy bought me crayons after that day. I drew you." Her heart softened at those words. "That's sweet. I'm sure it's beautiful." The man walked closer, a few books in his hand. "We come here every weekend," he said. "Sophie loves looking at picture books." "That's a nice habit," she said. "Books are a good kind of magic." He nodded. "So, you work here now?" "Just started today," she said. "It's not much, but I'm grateful." He smiled. "Everyone starts somewhere. I used to work in a small shop before I built my company." She looked surprised. "You own a company?" "Yeah," he said modestly. "A small one that somehow got big. But trust me, It didn't happen overnight. She didn't know why, but talking to him felt easy. There was no pressure, no judgment. His voice was calm and kind, and when he spoke, he looked at her like her words mattered. His daughter ran back with a handful of books. "Can we get these, Daddy?" she asked. He nodded. "Of course." Then he looked at the young woman. "Would you help us find something for kids around her age who like to draw?" "Sure," she said, smiling. She led them to another shelf and showed a few art books. The girl flipped through them, her face lighting up with excitement. After paying, the man turned to her. "We're heading to get ice cream. Would you like to join us?" She hesitated. "Oh, I don't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be," he said. "It's the least I can do after that cafe situation." His daughter chimed in. "Please, you can get strawberry flavor. It's the best." She couldn't help but laugh. "All right, maybe just for a little while." They walked to a small shop nearby, the kind that sold homemade ice cream in old-fashioned glass cups. The girl talked non-stop, telling stories about school, her drawings, and her favorite cartoons. The woman listened, smiling, while the man occasionally added a quiet comment that made them both laugh. When the girl went to wash her hands, the man looked at the woman and said softly, "You seemed upset that day at the cafe. I hope things are better now." She looked down at her spoon, then nodded slowly. "A bit. I found this job, so that helps. It's small, but it's honest work." "That's something to be proud of," he said. "Most people overlook small steps, but those are the ones that matter most." She looked up and met his eyes. There was no pity in them, only understanding. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not for what she lacked, but for who she was. When it was time to leave, the girl hugged her goodbye. "Come see me again," she said cheerfully. "I will," the woman promised, smiling. As they parted ways, she felt something warm settle inside her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close to hope. Days passed. The man and his daughter began visiting the bookstore often. Sometimes they stayed just a few minutes, sometimes longer. Each visit felt easier, more natural. They talked about books, art, and little everyday things. One afternoon, the girl brought her a drawing, a picture of 3 people holding hands under a tree. "That's you," she said proudly, pointing at the middle figure. "You're part of our picture now." The woman felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. It's beautiful." She wanted to say more, but words failed her. The man watched quietly, his eyes soft. He didn't know what this friendship was turning into, but it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. As weeks went by, he found himself visiting the bookstore even when his daughter wasn't with him. Sometimes he'd just stop by to buy a coffee from the small cafe corner inside. They'd talk briefly, and every conversation left him lighter. She learned that he had been raising his daughter alone for years. He learned that she still dreamed of opening a small art studio someday. They both discovered that small conversations could heal the quiet spaces in their lives. Then one evening, as the store was about to close, it began to rain again. The same soft rain that had filled the city on the day they first met. He arrived, slightly drenched, with a bright yellow umbrella in his hand. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing it to her. "It's coming down hard out there." She smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. You didn't have to come all this way." He shrugged. "I didn't mind. Besides, my daughter said she didn't want her friend to get wet." She laughed softly. "Your daughter is very sweet." "She has good instincts," he said, looking at her with quiet warmth. The shop was empty now, just the sound of rain tapping against the windows. She looked at him, then down at the umbrella in her hands. "It's funny," she said. "When I walked into that cafe weeks ago, I thought it would be the worst day of my life, but it turned out to be the start of something good." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the hardest days bring us to the right places." She met his gaze and smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. When she finally stepped outside into the rain, she opened the umbrella he'd given her. The world smelled fresh again, washed clean. And though she didn't know what the future held, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Faith that maybe, just maybe, good things could still happen to people who kept going, even when all they had was $5 and a bit of courage. The sun rose slowly over the city, casting golden streaks across the streets and buildings. She stepped outside her small apartment with a sense of quiet purpose. The morning air was crisp, and the streets were still wet from last night's rain. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight, and took a deep breath. The world felt a little lighter today. Her new job at the bookstore had begun to give her a sense of routine. It wasn't much, but it was something she could hold on to. Each day she arranged shelves, greeted customers, and helped people find the stories they wanted. The work was simple, but it reminded her that even small tasks could make a difference. And it reminded her of the cafe, of the stranger who had quietly helped her when she had so little. She smiled at the memory as she walked down the street, passing familiar corners and shops. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever see him again, the man whose kindness had surprised her. She thought about him often, not in a romantic way yet, but in a way that made her heart feel lighter than it had in months. The bookstore bell jingled as she entered, and she immediately began arranging the new arrivals. That morning was quiet, only a few customers trickling in to browse. She liked these moments of calm, where she could straighten the shelves and feel the smell of paper and ink filling the air. Around midday, she heard the familiar sound of small footsteps and laughter. She looked up and saw him walking toward the counter with his daughter. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment they both froze. Then he smiled warmly. "Hey," he said gently. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She felt a strange calm in his presence, a sense of comfort she couldn't explain. His daughter ran ahead, pointing at a shelf filled with picture books.
"Look, Daddy."
"I want this one." He chuckled and followed her. She watched them for a moment, smiling at the simple warmth between them. There was something real about their bond, something she couldn't help but admire. After a few minutes, he approached her again. "I thought we could find a few more books for Sophie," he said, holding a small stack in his hands. "She really enjoys the stories you suggested last time." "That's wonderful," she said, taking the books and showing him a few more options. "She seems very creative." "She is," he replied, his eyes softening. "And she notices the little things. Like that day at the cafe, for example." Her cheeks warmed slightly. "I don't know why she remembers that day so well," she said, trying to sound casual. "It was just a day," he nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Sometimes days like that leave the biggest impression." They spent the next hour helping Sophie pick books. She watched as the girl flipped through pages, asking questions and laughing at the illustrations. The man occasionally added comments, guiding her gently without taking control. It was clear to her how much he cared about his daughter, how much he wanted her to grow up kind and thoughtful. When it was time to leave, he turned to her. "Would you like to join us for lunch?" "Sophie insists, and honestly, I don't mind either." She hesitated. I wouldn't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing," he said with a small smile. "Come on, it's just lunch." "Nothing fancy." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, thank you." They walked to a small diner nearby. Sophie immediately claimed a booth by the window and began chattering excitedly about her day. She talked about school projects, friends, and the new art supplies she had received. The young woman listened, smiling and laughing when appropriate. The man watched both of them quietly, occasionally asking her questions about herself. They talked about simple things at first: the bookstore, favorite books, and small dreams. Slowly, the conversation shifted to more personal matters. "You seem very focused," he said gently. "Even when things are difficult, you keep going." "That's rare." She hesitated, then shrugged. "I have to. Life doesn't wait for anyone." He nodded thoughtfully. "True, but that doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone." His words lingered with her. She had spent so long struggling quietly, trying to survive without asking for help. And yet here was someone who seemed to understand, someone who offered kindness without judgment. Lunch passed quickly. They shared stories and laughter, and for a while the world outside the diner didn't exist. Sophie told jokes, and the woman found herself laughing freely. The man told a story about a project at work, but it was light and funny, not the usual stress he carried. When they finally left the diner, the rain had returned, soft and steady. The man handed her an umbrella. For the walk back, he said. She smiled. Thank you. You didn't have to. It's nothing, he replied. Consider it a small reminder that some days aren't as bad as they seem. They walked together, Sophie skipping between them, telling stories and pointing out birds and puddles. The woman felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The kind that comes from connection, from being seen and heard without fear of judgment. Over the next few weeks, their paths began to cross more often. The man and his daughter visited the bookstore regularly, sometimes just to browse, sometimes to say hello. Each encounter was simple but meaningful. Conversations were natural, flowing without effort. The girl adored the woman, calling her Miss Sunshine, and the woman found herself looking forward to their visits more than she expected. One afternoon, the woman received an unexpected message from the man. It was brief. Would you like to come to the park with us tomorrow? Sophie wants to show you something. She paused, feeling a mix of curiosity and nerves. Finally, she typed back, I'd love to. The next day, the park was quiet, with only a few people strolling along the paths. The man and his daughter were already there, sitting on a bench near the pond. Sophie waved energetically when she saw her. Come see, the girl shouted, running toward her. I made a drawing just for you. She knelt beside Sophie, taking the picture in her hands. It was a bright, colorful scene of 3 people, a woman, a man, and a little girl, holding hands under a tree. She looked up at the man, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It's beautiful, she said softly, touched by the gesture. Sophie beamed. You're in it! I see that, she said, laughing gently. Thank you, Sophie. I'll keep it safe. They spent the afternoon together, walking along the paths, feeding ducks, and sharing stories. The woman learned more about the man, his dreams, his struggles, the challenges of raising a child alone. He learned more about her hopes, her fears, the small dreams she kept hidden from the world. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she felt lighter than she had in months. She realized that these simple moments, laughter, shared stories, quiet understanding, were more meaningful than any grand gesture or material comfort. As they walked back to the streetcar stop, Sophie holding their hands, the man said quietly, I'm glad you came today. You've made a difference in both our lives more than you know. She smiled, her heart swelling. And you've made a difference in mine. They parted ways that evening with promises to meet again soon. The woman walked home slowly, her mind buzzing with thoughts. The world hadn't changed, and the challenges of life were still there. But for the first time, she felt that she wasn't facing them alone. The days turned into weeks. The bookstore visits continued. The park afternoons became a small routine. She even started saving a little money each week, hoping that one day she could open a small art studio of her own. The man began to trust her presence in their lives more. He shared little details, Sophie's school achievements, funny moments, and even worries about the future. She offered advice and support when she could, never judging, always listening. Their bond grew quietly, without drama or expectation. It was built on simple gestures, a shared laugh, a listening ear, a warm smile. And in those moments, they both discovered that connection could heal, even if life was messy and unpredictable. One evening, as they left the bookstore together, the man paused. Would you like to come over for dinner one night, just us? Sophie wants to show you her latest drawing. She felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. I'd like that, she replied softly. When they parted that night, she walked home under the glow of streetlights, feeling a sense of hope she hadn't known in a long time. She realized that kindness, patience, and small acts of care could change a life in ways she never expected. And though she still faced struggles, the rent, the small income, the uncertainty of the future, she felt a quiet courage growing inside her. She knew that with support, friendship, and moments of genuine connection, life could be not just survived but lived fully. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the cafe, the bookstore, the park, and the simple journey that had brought her here. She smiled softly, knowing that the path ahead was unknown, but that she didn't have to walk it alone. And somewhere in the city, the man and his daughter felt the same, that even small moments of kindness could ripple through lives, changing them in ways that were quiet but powerful. The morning air felt warmer than usual, and she stepped out of her apartment with a light heart. Over the past few weeks, her life had begun to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly in ways she had never expected. The bookstore had become a small sanctuary where she could focus on simple things: organizing books, helping customers, and sharing moments of laughter with the man and his daughter. She walked down the street, her bag bouncing lightly on her shoulder, and thought about the park visits from the weekend. The memory of the little girl's bright smile and her endless questions made her smile. It was strange how someone she had met only a few weeks ago could make such a strong impression on her heart. Arriving at the bookstore, she was greeted by the familiar scent of paper, ink, and coffee. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, and she immediately began arranging the new arrivals. The store had grown busier lately, with people stopping in not only for books but also for small gifts and local crafts. She liked seeing the shelves filled, the store alive with activity. Around mid-morning, she noticed him entering through the door, his daughter skipping ahead of him as usual. The little girl waved excitedly, running straight toward her. "Good morning," the girl exclaimed. "Look what I made for you." She knelt down and saw a small drawing, carefully colored and detailed. It depicted 3 people, the girl, the man, and herself, standing together under a large tree with bright flowers all around. She looked up at the man, who smiled softly. "She's quite talented," he said. "She's been talking about you nonstop since yesterday." She laughed gently. "I'm honored. She's very creative." For the next hour, they wandered through the bookstore together. She helped Sophie find new books and guided them through the shelves filled with picture books, novels, and activity guides. The man asked a few questions about her favorite books and shared small stories about his childhood. Their conversation flowed naturally, free from tension or pressure, and she realized how comfortable she felt around him. After a while, the man suggested they go to a small cafe nearby. "Sophie wants to show you something," he said, smiling. "It's a little project she's been working on," she agreed, feeling curious. The cafe was cozy, with warm wooden tables and soft music playing in the background. They found a corner table, and the little girl immediately pulled out her project, a homemade scrapbook filled with drawings, stickers, and small notes. "This is for you," Sophie said proudly. "I wanted to show you all the things I like and the people I care about." She looked through the pages carefully, touched by the thought and effort. Each page was filled with color and imagination. "This is wonderful," she said softly. "I will treasure it." The man watched quietly, his eyes thoughtful. "You've made a big difference in her life already," he said gently. "Sometimes a kind person can change everything for a child without even realizing it." She shook her head. "No, it's really her. She's the one who made it special. I just get to be part of it." They spent the afternoon together, sharing ice cream, laughing, and talking about small things: school, books, and hobbies. The little girl's energy was infectious, and she found herself smiling more freely than she had in months. For the first time in a long while, she felt at ease, like she belonged in a space where kindness and laughter were more important than worries and money. Over the following weeks, their interactions became more frequent. The man and his daughter visited the bookstore almost every day, sometimes staying just a few minutes, sometimes longer. Each visit was simple, filled with quiet understanding, shared stories, and small moments of care. One evening, as the store was about to close, the man asked if she could join them for dinner. "Just us," he said. "Sophie wants to show you a new drawing she made." She felt a flutter of nervousness. Dinner at their home was more personal than meeting at a cafe or park. But the warmth of their previous interactions gave her courage. "I'd like that," she said softly. That evening, she arrived at their apartment, a small but cozy place filled with pictures, books, and toys. Sophie ran to her immediately, dragging her toward the kitchen table where the girl's latest drawing awaited. It was a colorful depiction of their 3 lives intertwined, with flowers, sunshine, and laughter filling every corner. "This is for you," Sophie said proudly, "so you remember we're friends." She knelt beside the table, feeling a lump in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." The man smiled from across the room. "You've become part of our world already," he said quietly. "Sophie speaks about you every day. She trusts you, and I do too." They shared a quiet meal together, simple dishes with fresh ingredients. Conversation flowed naturally, covering small everyday things, dreams, and favorite memories. She learned more about him, how he had struggled raising his daughter alone, the challenges he had faced in his career, and the moments that had shaped him. She shared some of her own story, carefully chosen details about her struggles and dreams. He listened without judgment, nodding and asking questions in a gentle, curious way. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not for her worries, her lack of money, or her failures, but for who she was as a person. After dinner, they all sat together in the living room. Sophie showed her drawings, and they laughed at her playful jokes. The man shared small stories about his childhood, funny incidents that made her laugh quietly. The atmosphere was warm and safe, a rare kind of comfort she had almost forgotten existed. As the evening drew to a close, the man walked her to the door. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said softly. "Sophie really enjoys your company, and so do I." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Thank you for inviting me." "I'm glad too." Outside, the night was quiet, with only the soft hum of distant traffic. She walked home slowly, thinking about the evening, about the warmth of their home, about the kindness that had become a regular part of her life. She realized that life was not just about surviving, but about connecting with people, building trust, and allowing small acts of care to grow into something meaningful. Over the next few days, she noticed herself growing more confident. She continued saving small amounts of money each week, thinking about her dream of opening an art studio someday. She worked diligently at the bookstore, learning more about organizing events, helping customers, and understanding the quiet power of community. The man and his daughter continued to be part of her routine. They visited regularly, sometimes for books, sometimes just to share stories. Each interaction strengthened the bond between them, a quiet friendship rooted in trust, kindness, and shared understanding. One afternoon, as she walked home from work, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here, from the cafe where a stranger had quietly helped her, to the bookstore where she found stability, to the home where warmth and laughter awaited her. It had been a series of small, seemingly insignificant moments that had changed everything. She realized that life was unpredictable, full of challenges and surprises. But she also realized that kindness, trust, and connection could turn even the hardest days into something meaningful. And as she walked through the streets of her city, she felt a quiet hope blossoming inside her, a hope that with courage, persistence, and the people she had come to trust, she could face whatever came next. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the man and his daughter. She smiled softly, remembering their laughter, their stories, and the small moments of care that had become a regular part of her life. She closed her eyes with a sense of peace, knowing that even in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, there were places, people, and moments that could make everything feel a little brighter. And somewhere in the city, the man and his daughter felt the same. Their lives, once routine and ordinary, had been touched by a simple act of kindness, leading to friendship, trust, and quiet joy. The connection they shared was growing, unspoken but undeniable, built on the small, meaningful moments that life often overlooked. She drifted to sleep that night with a heart full of hope, ready to face the future, ready to continue the journey, and ready to embrace whatever new moments awaited her. The city streets were quiet that morning, with sunlight streaming between the tall buildings and reflecting off puddles from the night's rain. She stepped outside her apartment, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. Life had changed in small, almost imperceptible ways, and yet those small changes had added up to something significant. Her mornings now began with a sense of purpose. Work at the bookstore was still part of her routine, but she no longer felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on her. Every day brought small victories: a satisfied customer, a new book arrival, a child's delighted laugh when she showed them a picture book. These moments were simple, but they mattered deeply. Today, however, felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. She adjusted her bag and headed toward the bookstore, noticing how the city seemed warmer, more inviting. Birds chirped softly in the trees lining the streets, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the corner bakery. Arriving at the bookstore, she opened the door to the familiar jingle of the bell. The smell of books and coffee greeted her, comforting and familiar. She immediately began arranging the new arrivals, straightening shelves and checking the display for the week's popular titles. It was a routine she had grown to love, one that grounded her in the small joys of daily life. Around mid-morning, she heard the familiar sound of laughter from the doorway. She looked up and saw him entering with his daughter. They waved eagerly, and she returned the gesture, smiling warmly. Sophie ran ahead, her excitement obvious as she held something behind her back. "Look what I made," Sophie exclaimed as she reached the counter. She revealed a small, carefully wrapped package. "It's for you." She took it gently, feeling the warmth in her hands. "You didn't have to," she said softly. Sophie's eyes sparkled. "I wanted to. You're part of our family now." The man smiled quietly, a subtle pride in his gaze. "She's been working on it for days," he said. "And she insists you open it now." She carefully unwrapped the package to find a small hand-painted frame. Inside was a picture of the three of them, drawn in bright, cheerful colors. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful handwriting, were the words, "Friends forever." Tears pricked her eyes. She looked up at the man, who nodded encouragingly. "You've changed our lives more than you know," he said quietly. She felt a lump in her throat. "No, you've changed mine," she whispered. "Every day you and Sophie have given me hope." They spent the next hour walking through the park, enjoying the crisp air and the sound of children playing. Sophie skipped ahead, holding a small sketchbook and chatting about the pictures she wanted to create. The young woman walked beside the man, feeling the rhythm of their steps in sync, a quiet understanding growing between them. As they reached a small bench by the pond, the man turned to her. "I wanted to ask you something," he said carefully. "You've been part of our lives for some time now. Would you consider coming to my office sometime? There's a project I think you'd enjoy, something creative. I want to help you in a way that matters." She blinked, surprised. I'd like that," she said slowly, unsure of how to express the mix of emotions she felt: gratitude, curiosity, and a little nervousness. They spent the afternoon sharing ideas, discussing dreams and planning small projects. She realized how much she had grown in the past months, how her confidence had blossomed through simple acts of trust and kindness. She could now imagine a future that seemed possible, one where she wasn't struggling alone. Over the following weeks, their collaboration grew. The man introduced her to contacts in the creative field, helping her explore freelance work in design and art. He offered advice, encouragement, and guidance, but never in a way that felt controlling. She felt respected, trusted, and capable. Sophie adored her, often bringing drawings and notes to show her progress. She learned new techniques, experimented with colors, and began creating a portfolio she could one day use to open her small studio. The woman felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she was building something for herself, not just surviving day to day, but creating a path forward. One sunny afternoon, the man invited her and Sophie to a small celebration at his home. It was a casual gathering, just a few friends and colleagues, but the warmth of the home and the laughter of the people made it feel special. Sophie proudly showed off her latest drawings, explaining each one with the confidence of a child who felt loved and encouraged. After the gathering, the man and the woman stayed behind to clean up and talk quietly. He handed her a cup of tea and they sat together on the couch, watching Sophie play nearby. "You've done more than you realize," he said softly. "You've brought joy to her life and you've reminded me of what truly matters. The small things, kindness, patience, and presence, and they change everything." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I never expected any of this when I walked into that cafe months ago. I only had $5, and yet, here I am, with you both, feeling like I belong somewhere." He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You do belong, and this is only the beginning." The days turned into weeks, and she continued to grow in confidence and skill. She began taking on small freelance projects, saving enough to consider renting a tiny space for her art studio. Each success, no matter how small, felt monumental. One evening, after a long day of work and meetings, the three of them sat on the balcony of his apartment. The city lights twinkled below, and the air was warm with the approaching summer. Sophie was drawing quietly beside them, humming a tune while they sipped tea and talked about the future. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "I've saved enough to rent a small studio space. It's not much, but it's a start." The man looked at her with pride. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. You've worked hard and you deserve this." Sophie looked up from her drawing, eyes wide. "Does this mean we can come visit your studio?" she asked excitedly. She laughed softly. Of course. You'll be the first guests. Over the next few months, she worked tirelessly to prepare her studio. She painted walls, arranged shelves, and filled the space with her artwork. She wanted it to be welcoming, a place where creativity could flourish and anyone who came in would feel inspired. The grand opening day arrived. She was nervous but excited. She had invited a few friends, neighbors, and her new clients. The man and his daughter arrived early, carrying flowers and small gifts. Sophie immediately ran to show off a corner of the studio she had helped decorate. "This is amazing," the man said, looking around. "You've created something truly beautiful." She smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond words. "I couldn't have done it without your encouragement," she said softly. "You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." The day passed in a blur of smiles, congratulations, and laughter. She spoke with visitors, shared her vision, and felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. And through it all, the man and his daughter remained by her side, silent pillars of support, quietly proud of her achievements. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the studio, she stepped outside onto the small balcony, taking a moment to breathe. The city stretched out before her, alive and vibrant, filled with possibilities. The man joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "Look at what you've built," he said softly. "All from courage, patience, and a little hope." She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "It feels unreal, like a dream I never thought I could reach." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's real, and it's yours. You made it happen." Sophie appeared beside them, holding a small handmade sign that read, "Our favorite artist." They laughed together, the three of them, standing there as the city lights flickered below. It wasn't just a studio opening. It was a celebration of persistence, kindness, and the quiet miracles that happen when people believe in one another. She realized in that moment that the journey, from the small cafe with only $5 in her pocket to this thriving little studio, had been shaped by unexpected kindness, patience, and trust. It wasn't about luck. It was about connection, courage, and allowing herself to accept help when it came. That night, as she locked the studio and headed home, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but it had led her here, and for the first time she truly believed that no matter what came next, she could face it with hope, courage, and the people who had become her family. Somewhere in the city, the man and his daughter felt the same, that small acts of kindness could ripple through lives, that trust and connection could change destinies, and that hope, even when fragile, could grow into something beautiful. She walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, the night calm and comforting. She thought about the future, the studio, her dreams, and the bonds she had formed, and she knew deep in her heart that life could be hard, unpredictable, and uncertain. But it could also be full of warmth, love, and quiet miracles if one allowed it to be. For the first time in a long while, she didn't just survive. She lived,